Hello and welcome to this month's Tullie Textiles session. So it's our second session of 2024. Had to get the right year then. What I thought we'd have a look at this time is making these lovely felt flowers. They're really nice and simple to make. Once you get the hang of them, you can make multiples. I've sewn a brooch back. I've glued a brooch back onto this one and I use it as a brooch. But you could make multiples of them and make them into like an everlasting posy, use them for decorating things, whatever you fancy. So as always with Tullie Textiles, the materials you'll need should be nice and easily available. So even if you haven't got them, you should be able to get hold of them pretty easily. And as always, use it as a jumping off point. Try what we're doing today, but then put your own spin on it, see how you want to develop it. And as always, let me know. So for those of you who are new to Tullie Textiles is run by Tullie House Museum and Art Gallery, which is currently closed at the moment for refurbishments, but our community projects are still going like this. And Tullie Textiles meets once a month. We meet online most of the time. And each month I'll show you a different textile skill or technique. And as well as this pre-recorded video, in the afternoon of a Tullie Textiles day, we have a Zoom meeting. So you can come and join us in the Zoom room and we'll have a go at whatever the activity that month is. And also I'll have an object from the collections to share with you. So without further ado, let's have a quick look at what we're going to need for this activity. So most importantly, you're going to need some felt. You can do this with other materials. You can do it with pretty much any fabric, but bear in mind that you're going to have raw edges. So anything that frays a lot isn't ideal. Anything that's very loose and floppy again isn't ideal. So if you want to do it with a woven fabric, I beg your pardon, then make sure it's something that's got a bit of structure. And you could always use pinking shears to cut these bits out rather than normal scissors, and that would help with the fraying. But you do want something that's got a bit of structure to it. So felt is ideal and easily available. You're going to need something to make circles with, circular templates. I'm just using a roll of masking tape, as you can see. Something to draw around your templates with, scissors for cutting out, needle and thread, and if you want to, you can add a button to the centre of your flower. So I've got a nice purple velvet one in the centre of this one, but you don't have to have that. You can leave them without. But if you've watched any of my other videos or you've met me in real life, you know that I do love a button and never miss an excuse to add something shiny to things. So I'm just going to move my materials out of the way a little bit so that I can show you what we're going to do. What we're going to start with is making the circles which are going to make up our flower. And you generally need 7 circles. We're going to have 6 petals and a base circle. So depending on how confident you are with cutting, you could fold and cut several at once. I'm going to try and do a couple at a time for the sake of speed, but enjoy the process. So if you want to cut each one out individually, that's no problem at all. And I'm going to use the inside of the tape as my guide. So I'm just going to mark that on there, and I'm just using a coloured pencil, and this will just kind of brush off as I'm working, which means that it won't leave a mark on the edge. If you're using something like a pen to mark your felt, just bear in mind that you are going to see the cut edges of your felt, so cut just inside your pen mark, so you cut the pen mark off. There we go, so that's 2, 4, 6, and I can just about, I'll squeeze another one in there once I've cut those ones out for my 7. So I don't know how well that's showing up on the camera, but you can just about see the marks I've made with my coloured pencil, and I'm just going to cut these out. One of the other nice things about working with felt is that you can kind of manipulate it. So if you end up with slightly wonky circles, shall we say, you can just sort of pull them back into shape a little bit. It doesn't matter if they're not totally accurate. We're going for circular-ish. ish is always good. There we go. So 2 down, 4 to go. Working my way around. It's quite bright, this pink. I think it ought to come with some form of health warning. I should probably be wearing sunglasses or something for this. But it was the only sheet big enough. So this is a roughly A4 size sheet of felt, which works pretty much perfectly for these flowers. You can obviously play around with scale, so you can make smaller or bigger ones by altering the size of circle that you're using, but that will obviously affect the amount of felt you need. So if you've only got a little bit of felt, have a go with something a bit smaller for your template. If you've got loads, you could have a go with something a bit bigger and just have a little play around with it. What I'm going to do to make the best use of my felt, the circle for the base can get away with being a little bit smaller than the other circles. So whilst this doesn't quite fit a full circle, to be honest, it's near enough. So rather than cut into that big bit, which I can use for something else, I'm just going to use this corner. So this is my 7th circle, which I'm going to use as my base. So I'm just going to carefully cut round that one. There we go. Pop those bits to the side. So I've got my base circle and 6 slightly larger than that circles, but to be honest, there's not really a lot in it. You wouldn't be able to tell. Circles of felt, which are going to make my petals. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start making the petals, but before I do that, I'm going to mark the centre of this. So to do that, I'm going to fold it in half and then half again, so fold it into quarters. And I'm actually going to use my needle and thread. You could do this with a pin if you don't want it to be permanent, but I've got my needle and thread ready to go, and what I'm going to do is just start it off in the centre so I know where the middle is. And the reason I'm doing this will hopefully become very clear. So I'm not actually sewing it together into quarters, I'm just making a mark where the centre is, so that when I open it out flat, you can see that's not a terribly good circle, but we'll not worry about that. That's the centre of my almost circle. What we're basically going to do is we're going to make 6 petals that are all going to join in this centre point. So that's why I'm marking the centre points. But I'm just going to pop that there for now. Now, making the petals is one of those things that once you can do it, it's dead easy and you think, why couldn't I do that before? But the first couple of times you do it, it might kind of make your brain melt just a tiny bit. Not too much, but a little bit. Because we're going to fold them in a certain way so that we get this lovely ripply effect. And the way we do that is we fold it in half to start with, and then we're going to kind of make a wiggle, an S shape. We're going to fold it into thirds, which is always a difficult number to fold into, but with a wiggle in. So you kind of take it one way and then the other. So you're making, well, a Z in this case rather than S, but you could do it the other way, if my brain will let me. There we go. So that you make an S shape. So if you can see, it's kind of going into thirds by making this nice S or Z curve. And I'm just pinching it together at the point. Don't worry too much about getting it completely accurate. We're going for flowers which are quite organic, so you want it sort of fairly loose. There we go. So we're going into kind of these 3 sections like that. So I'll do that one more time. So fold it in half and then kind of put an S or a Z wiggle into it to make your shape. And once you've done a couple, it will make sense. So just have a little practice at that. Once you've made your petal, you can then attach it to the base. And the way we do that, this is why we've marked the centre point, is to just pop that bit there, so where all the joins meet, where the folds meet, matches up with the centre of your base circle, and we're just going to pop a little stitch through, and I'm just using normal sewing thread here, nothing fancy, just doing a couple of little stitches through to hold it in place. And what you'll find is that it'll probably burst open like that. You've got two options. You can take your stitch a bit further up, or what I tend to do is wait till I've got my other petals in, and what they'll do is they'll kind of hold everything in place a little bit more. But if you're finding it frustrating, weigh it down with something, put another stitch in, it really doesn't matter. So what I might do is just take my stitch a bit further up that fold. So at the moment, I've just got this very, very tip of it held in. But what I might do is just take it a little bit further into those folds, just to hold it in place a little bit more. Another advantage to working with felt is that as you pull your stitches, they kind of sink into the fabric, so you lose them a bit more. And you can see now that's holding its shape much better. So what we're going to do is repeat this process, making the other 6 petals. So we take our felt circle, fold it in half, and then into thirds, making an S or a Z, depending on which is easiest for you. It really doesn't matter. So fold it in half, wiggle it together to make that Z shape in this case, pinch those folds together, and then add it, a bit like a slice of pizza, to your base circle and stitch it in place. So again, just some very simple, nothing fancy here, nothing difficult, just in and out. We're just doing holding stitches. We're not worried about how it looks. It's just to hold it all in place. If I show you the back, you know, we're not going for neatness here. It doesn't matter. This is the back. No one's going to see it, or it's going to be covered. It's just to hold these petals in place. And you can see already how that's starting to come together. So we'll get those other petals in place and see where we're at. So I've sewn my 6 petals on, and you can see now that I've got this really rather lovely, quite sculptural form. Although actually in this bright pink it looks a little bit like a brain, but you know, that's not a bad thing. Now, if I give it a little squish in the middle, you can see our petals, our little pizza segments, and you can see my little stitches there in the middle. So at this point, you can either decide to leave it quite sculptural, and you might just want to add a couple of stitches just to hold bits and pieces in place. Or what you can do is to add something to the middle. So you could add a little stack of buttons to make more of a flower centre. That's quite pretty. You could add more of a feature button, little ladybird. It's quite nice with a little glittery ladybird. I found these buttons with shanks do work quite well, because you can kind of pull them down into the tiny gap between the petals, and it still allows you to keep this quite sculptural form, but to have that showing. I quite like that kind of slightly pearly effect. So I'm going to go for this one, and I'm just going to secure it into the middle. Had to stop recording for a minute there because I was just quietly choking, or possibly quite loudly choking. So I've just been to get a glass of water, and hopefully I'll make it through the rest of the process without choking, which is always good. So all I'm doing is sewing this little button into the centre. I'm just again catching in the edge of the petals where I can, just for a bit of extra stability. But to be honest, it's pretty strong. I'm not worrying too much about where I come up and down. We'll go through once more, I think, just to be sure. and just kind of go with what you feel in terms of how many stitches you need to put in. If it feels really loose and wobbly, put a few more in. If it's feeling pretty firm and solid, that's grand, you don't need to. Just go with what you think. And then once you've got your button secured, if you're adding one, then you can just fasten off the thread on the back. And I'm just doing that with a couple of stitches, or I would be if I hadn't unthreaded myself. We'll just do a quick rethread. There we go. So just a few little stitches just to anchor it. There we go. And that is our felt flower nicely finished. And then you can just play around and say with how sculptural you want it, whether you want it all fluffed up a bit like a peony, or whether you want to flatten it out more kind of daisy-like. It really is up to you. Then, as I said at the beginning, what you do with this is up to you. You can add a little brooch back. You could make lots and sew them onto things, and again, play around with how sculptural you want it to be. But mostly, have fun and enjoy the process. Have an experiment with different fabrics, see how you get on, try different things. And as always, if you've got any comments, drop them below the video for me. If you've got any suggestions of activities or techniques you'd like to see at Tullie Textiles, let me know. But most of all, have fun, happy stitching, and I'll see you next month.